At Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law set a plate in front of me and said, "We've been thinking maybe it's time you moved to assisted living. We'll handle everything." I looked at my hands. I set my fork down. I didn't say a word. My name is Eleanor Marsh. I'm 72 years old, and I live in a pale yellow house on Crescent Mill Road in Harlows Creek, a small town in Western Virginia, where the maple trees turn so red in autumn that people drive from 2 counties over just to look at them. I've lived in that house for 31 years. I painted the shutters myself. I planted the rosemary along the front walk. I know which floorboard in the hallway creaks and which drawer in the kitchen sticks on humid mornings. That house knows me in the way that only places can, not with words, but with memory held in wood and plaster. I spent 30 years as a registered nurse, night shifts mostly, in the cardiac unit at Caldwell Regional. I've held the hands of people who were frightened. I've watched monitors and changed dressings and learned how to speak quietly in the hours when most of the world is asleep. I know what it looks like when someone is being cared for, and I know just as clearly what it looks like when someone is being managed. That Thanksgiving, I arrived at my son Daniel's house at 11 in the morning, same as every year. I brought the sweet potato casserole because it was the one dish his wife Sandra never got quite right. I also brought a pecan pie from the bakery on Route 9 and a small wrapped gift for my granddaughter Lily, who had just turned 14 and was at that age where everything embarrassed her except books and old music. I thought maybe she'd like the journal I found cloth-covered, deep green, with a small brass clasp. The house smelled like thyme and warm bread when I walked in. Sandra was at the stove, efficient as always, stirring something in a pot with her back to the door. Daniel came out from the den and hugged me in that brief way he'd developed over the years, firm on one side, already pulling away on the other. Lily was on the couch with her headphones around her neck. She waved. I waved back and set my casserole on the counter without being asked where to put it. We ate at one. The table was set beautifully. Sandra had placed small ceramic pumpkins between the dishes and folded the napkins into triangles. Everything was arranged and deliberate. I sat where I always sat, at the corner near the window that looks out onto the backyard where Daniel built Lily a treehouse when she was 7. I paid for the lumber. I remember the receipt. The meal moved the way those meals do: polite questions, short answers, a story from Daniel about work, a comment from Sandra about the neighborhood association. Lily ate quickly and asked to be excused. She took her journal with her when she left the table. I watched her go. It was when Sandra came back from refilling the water glasses that she paused behind her chair and said it. She had the careful voice she used when she'd rehearsed something. "Mom, we've actually been meaning to talk to you." She glanced at Daniel. He looked at his plate. "We've been thinking a lot about your situation. The house is getting to be a lot for one person. There's a really lovely place over in Belmont Sycamore Crossing. We looked into it. It's assisted living, but it's very nice. We'd help with everything. The paperwork, the move." I looked at my hands. I set my fork down. I picked up my water glass and drank from it slowly. Daniel said, "Mom, it's just we worry. The winter's hard up there on Crescent Mill." I had lived through 31 winters on Crescent Mill Road. I had shoveled that driveway myself until the year I bought a snowblower. I had never once called Daniel to worry him about ice or cold or the dark that comes early in December. I looked out the window at the empty treehouse. A strand of the old rope ladder was still hanging from one side, twisted and gray. I said, "Thank you for the meal, Sandra. It was lovely." I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. I stood, got my coat from the hook by the door, and left before the pecan pie was cut. No one called after me. I heard the door fall shut behind me with that soft click that sounds almost polite. I drove home slowly. The maple trees along Route 12 had already gone past their peak. The red had deepened into something darker, bruised at the edges. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes without getting out. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was doing something I hadn't done in a very long time. I was thinking about myself. That night, I didn't turn on the television. I made tea and sat at my kitchen table, where I have sat through most of the significant moments of my adult life, planning surgeries, signing report cards, filling out forms for Daniel's college financial aid, writing condolence letters when his father passed. There is a scratch near the edge of the table from the time Daniel dragged a toolbox across it and never mentioned it. I sanded it down and sealed it myself and didn't say a word. I went upstairs and pulled 2 boxes from the top of my closet. They were heavy, and I carried them down to the kitchen table one at a time. Inside were folders, bank statements, going back 11 years, receipts I had kept, not out of resentment, but out of habit, the way nurses document everything, because precision matters. I had always been careful with money. I understood it the way I understood medications. The right amount at the right time can save a life, and too much without attention can quietly do harm. I opened the first folder. The summer Daniel's contracting business nearly failed. I wrote a check for $44,000. He said it was a short-term loan. I said it was fine. I never brought it up again. In the folder, the bank statement showing the transfer, the deposit confirmation from his business account. No promissory note. I hadn't asked for one. When Sandra wanted to renovate the kitchen, new countertops, new appliances, the farmhouse sink she had seen in a magazine, I contributed $18,000. Sandra said I was welcome to choose the sink hardware. I chose brushed nickel. I never saw the kitchen finished because they'd already moved twice before the renovation was complete. Lily's private school tuition? The supplemental amount beyond what the scholarship covered. $6,000 a year for 4 years. Daniel said they'd pay me back when things stabilized. Things had stabilized several years ago. The medical bills from when Daniel had his appendix out, and the insurance gap left them exposed. $11,200. Sandra's mother's birthday party, the one they threw at the vineyard outside Charlottesville. I contributed $3,000 because Sandra said family should share in the costs. Her family, I drove 2 hours to attend. I sat at the edge of a table of people I didn't know and cut my own piece of cake. The down payment loan for their current house. $60,000. That was the one I had written as a check and handed to Daniel in an envelope because I thought it would feel less transactional. He said thank you and put it in his jacket pocket. He did not open the envelope in front of me. I used a yellow legal pad and a blue pen, and I wrote each item in my nurse's handwriting, neat, spaced, legible under any condition. I added carefully. The total, when I finally drew the line beneath the last number, was $293,000. I looked at it for a long time. Then I wrote it again at the bottom of the page, circled it, and set the pen down. I had never lacked for anything essential, but I had not taken a vacation in 4 years. I had not replaced the water heater when it started failing because I kept putting it off. I drove a car that was 9 years old and due for new tires. I had told myself this was frugality. Sitting at my kitchen table at midnight, I understood it was something else. I thought about Sycamore Crossing. I had actually driven past it once, on my way to a doctor's appointment in Belmont. It was a beige building with a circular driveway and a sign with a leaf on it, pleasant enough. A place where other people would decide when I woke up and when I ate, and how warm to keep the room. Sandra had researched it. She had the pamphlet ready. She had made a plan for my life without sitting down and asking me what my life looked like from the inside. In 30 years of nursing, I had helped dozens of patients transition to long-term care. I knew the difference between choosing that path and being steered toward it. I also knew that the people doing the steering were not always unkind. Sometimes they were just afraid of inconvenience, dressed up as concern. The next morning I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, a steady woman named Ruth Calloway, whom I had used for my will and for the sale of a piece of land I owned years ago. I told her I needed to review my estate documents. I told her I wanted to understand exactly what my assets were and who currently had any legal access to them. She said she could see me Thursday. The second call was to my bank. I asked to remove Daniel's name from the secondary account where he had been listed for years originally, so he could help me if I was hospitalized. I was asked if I was sure. I said yes. After I hung up, I stood at my kitchen sink and washed my one breakfast dish. The window above the sink faces east, and the morning light was pale gold, coming in flat across the yard. I had planted a rose of Sharon along the fence line years ago, and it had spread until it was nearly a hedge. It was bare now, late November, just dark, upright stems. But I knew exactly what it looked like in July. I put on my coat and drove to the YMCA on Anderson Street. I had been a member for 12 years and gone inconsistently, the way people go when they're tired. I walked into the front office and asked about volunteer opportunities. A young man with red hair named Marcus looked at the computer and said they were looking for someone to help with the senior fitness program on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. He said the previous volunteer had moved away and the group had been meeting without a leader. Did I have any health background? 30 years of cardiac nursing, I told him. He printed a form and slid it across the desk. I drove home by way of Harlows Creek Road, the long way, past the elementary school where Daniel had learned to read, and past the library branch where I had taken him every Saturday until he decided he was too old for it. The library had a banner in the window that said Reading Group Thursdays at 6. I pulled into the parking lot and sat there for a moment, then went inside. A woman at the front desk introduced herself as Vera. She had a gray braid over one shoulder and reading glasses pushed up on her head. The Thursday Reading Group, she said, had 7 members and was currently working through a book about a woman who sailed solo across the Atlantic at 63. They'd love another member, she said. She asked if I liked being on the water. I told her I had always been afraid of open water, but that I admired anyone who wasn't. She laughed. She said that was the perfect reason to join. I went to the meeting that Thursday. The group met in a back room with low lighting and mismatched chairs and a table with a coffee carafe that nobody seemed to remember to refill. There were 6 women and 1 man, all between 55 and 80. The man's name was George. He had been a high school history teacher and still spoke in the rhythms of someone used to holding a room. One of the women, Patricia, had driven a school bus for 26 years. Another, whose name was June, had moved to Harlows Creek after her divorce and been here for 11 years and had no intention of leaving. We talked about the book for an hour and then kept talking about other things. Nobody asked about my family. Nobody asked if I was lonely. They asked what I thought about the captain's decision in Chapter 4, and I said I thought she was right to trust the wind even when she couldn't see where it was taking her. When I got home that night, Lily had left a message on my answering machine. I still have an answering machine, she said. Grandma, I don't know what happened at Thanksgiving, but I used the journal. I just wanted you to know. Then she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, also, the clasp is really cool. Then she hung up. I stood in the hallway and listened to it twice. I went to see Ruth on Thursday morning. She had the documents spread out on her conference table when I arrived. She walked me through each one patiently: the will, the power of attorney, the beneficiary designations on my retirement accounts. I asked her about removing Daniel's name from the power of attorney. She said it was simple. She said I could also update the will. I asked her what my options were. We talked for an hour and a half. When I left, I had set in motion the removal of 2 people from documents where I had placed them in a different season of my life, when I thought the best way to love someone was to make yourself legally available to them. I drove home, stopped at the hardware store on Main, and bought the parts to replace the fitting on the upstairs bathroom faucet that had been dripping since spring. The man at the counter walked me through what I needed. I had done this before, years ago, when Daniel was in middle school and I couldn't afford a plumber and had to figure things out myself. The knowledge came back the way practical things do, not all at once, but as your hands begin to move. I fixed the faucet that afternoon. It took 40 minutes. When I turned the water back on and held my hand under the tap, it ran clean and silent the way it was supposed to. The following week, I started with the Tuesday morning fitness group at the Y. There were 14 people when I arrived, most of them in their late 60s and 70s. They had been doing a circuit without any real guidance, some of them overexerting, some of them doing exercises that weren't safe for their joints. I introduced myself. I said I had 30 years in cardiac nursing, and I was there to help, not to manage anyone. A woman named Dolores looked at me for a long moment and then said, "Good." The last person talked to us like we were made of paper. We went through a modified circuit. I watched how they moved. I made quiet adjustments. At the end, a man named Harold, who had a knee replacement and was still learning to trust it, said it was the first session where he'd felt like his body was working with him instead of against him. I drove home thinking about that, what it meant to move with your body instead of against it. I had spent years making myself smaller, quieter, less present, thinking that was the way to stay welcome. I had moved against myself for a long time without realizing it had a cost. Daniel called on a Sunday evening in December. I was reading when the phone rang. I let it ring twice before I answered. He said he'd been thinking about Thanksgiving. He said Sandra felt bad about how it came out. He said the word blunt, as if it explained something. I listened without interrupting. He said, "Mom, we weren't trying to push you out. We were worried. I said, I know you were worried, Daniel. He was quiet. I said, but I want you to understand something. I'm not fragile, and I'm not a problem to be solved. I kept my voice even. You've known me for 49 years. You know I'll ask for help when I need it. When I don't ask, it means I don't need it. He said, you make it hard sometimes. I said, I make it honest. He didn't have a response to that. I told him I loved him. I told him I would see him at Christmas if he wanted me there, but that I would need to be asked, not assumed, not arranged for, asked. The way you ask someone whose time and presence matter to you, he said. Of course we want you there. I said, then ask me. There was a pause. Then he said, Mom, would you come for Christmas? I said I would think about it and let him know by the 15th. Then I told him good night. I set the phone down and went back to my book. The second Tuesday, Dolores brought coffee in a thermos and poured cups for everyone before we started. She handed me one without asking how I took it. It was strong and black and exactly right. I didn't comment on it. I just drank it and said thank you. She said, you're different from the others we've had. I asked what she meant. She said, you don't perform. She tilted her head slightly. Some people come in here, and you can see them working very hard to seem warm. You just are or you aren't, depending on the moment. It's restful. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I just started us on the warm-up. 2 weeks before Christmas, I went to the bank and opened a new account in my name only. I transferred a sum into it, not symbolic, not cautious, but substantial. Enough to replace my car, enough to take a trip, enough to have the water heater replaced and the gutters cleaned and the south-facing windows resealed where the cold had been coming in for 3 years. Enough to take a watercolor class at the Art Center on Maple if I wanted to, which I was still deciding about. I did not call Daniel to tell him what I had done. I did not call Sandra. It was not something I did out of anger or to make a point. It was something I did because it was my money, earned over 30 years of night shifts and holidays worked and quiet competence. It was something I did the way you do a thing that has always been yours to do, just because you finally stopped forgetting. I called Lily on a Wednesday afternoon. She picked up on the second ring, which surprised me. I asked how the journal was going. She said she'd filled almost 20 pages. She said she'd been writing about a lot of things she didn't know she had words for. I told her that was the reason journals existed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Grandma, were you sad at Thanksgiving? I told her I wasn't sad. I told her I was paying attention. She thought about that. Then she said, is that different? I told her it was very different. She asked if I would teach her how to do it someday. I told her I would do my best, but that it mostly came from practice and from getting quiet enough to hear yourself think. She said that sounded hard. I said it was, at first. She said she'd been reading about women who did things late in life, painters who didn't start until they were 60, writers who published their first books in their 70s. She asked if I thought it was ever too late. I told her the question was built wrong. I told her too late for what, compared to whom, measured how. I told her the better question was what you wanted and whether you were moving toward it. She said, I think you're moving now, Grandma. I looked out the kitchen window at the rows of Sharon, bare and dark against the snow. Yes, I said, I think I am. The Thursday reading group finished the sailing book and voted to start a novel set in the Scottish Highlands. George voted against it but agreed to keep coming anyway. June brought cookies the following week, the soft, ginger kind that crumble a little in your hands. Vera from the front desk started sitting in on the last 20 minutes of our meetings just to listen. Nobody asked me about my children or my house or my plans. They asked what I thought. They disagreed with me sometimes. They remembered what I'd said the week before and brought it back up. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. On a cold evening in the second week of December, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and wrote Daniel a message. I told him I would come for Christmas. I told him I would bring the sweet potato casserole. I told him I had some things I wanted to say when I got there, and that I hoped he and Sandra would be willing to listen. I said it was not a confrontation. I said it was a conversation that was a long time coming, and that I had waited this long because I had not been sure I had the words. Now I did. I did not apologize for waiting. I did not explain myself. I pressed send and went to make another cup of tea. I thought about the night of Thanksgiving, sitting in my car in the driveway with the engine off. I had been so still that evening, but it was not the stillness of defeat. It was the kind of stillness I recognized from those long night shifts, the moment before a situation changes, when everything that's about to happen is already in motion, and the only useful thing to do is be ready. I had been quiet for a long time. I had given a great deal without making a sound. I had arrived at every table where I was wanted, and some where I was needed, and a few where I was simply used. And I had brought everything with me every single time: the casserole, the gifts, the checks in unmarked envelopes, the willingness to be the one who never needed anything in return. I wasn't angry about it. Anger required believing it could have gone differently, and I was too honest to pretend I hadn't chosen it, year by year, in small increments that felt like love at the time. Some of it was love, some of it was habit, some of it was a kind of fear I had never quite named, until I sat alone on Thanksgiving night with a yellow legal pad and a blue pen, and wrote a number that ended up being larger than I had expected. But I was done counting backwards. I was done measuring what had gone out without asking what was coming in. The rosemary along my front walk came back every spring. I had planted it expecting it would need tending, and it did. But it also spread beyond what I'd planned for. Thick and silver green and fragrant, something passers-by bent down to touch without asking permission. I had never thought of myself as a thing that grew on its own. I had always thought of myself as someone who grew things for other people. This winter I was learning something different. I was learning that you can give for 30 years and still have something left. That the giving was not the problem. That the problem was forgetting, in the middle of all that giving, to leave anything for the person doing it. That the woman who shoveled her own driveway and fixed her own faucet and drove the long way home so she could look at the maple trees, that woman had always been worth knowing. She just needed to stop being the last one to notice. I was 72 years old. I had good hands and a clear mind and a house on Crescent Mill Road where the shutters were the right shade of gray and the rosemary came back every year without being asked. I had a reading group on Thursdays and 14 people on Tuesday mornings who were learning to trust their knees. I had a granddaughter who filled 20 pages without knowing she had that many words in her. I had a name that belonged to no role and no invoice and no quiet arrangement. Eleanor Marsh. Not Daniel's mother, not Sandra's reference point, not the woman with the casserole and the unsigned checks, just Eleanor. And I was just beginning to understand what that meant. If you're listening to this tonight, wherever you are, maybe in a kitchen that feels too large, or a car parked in a driveway while you get yourself together, I want to ask you something, not how much you've given. I think you already know that number. I want to ask you when you last thought of yourself as someone worth arriving for. Not for what you bring, not for what you can still manage. Just for the fact of being you, present, in a room, worth a chair at the table. Think of someone in your life who has always been there quietly, who showed up without being invited because they didn't want to be a burden, who folded themselves small so others could be comfortable. Maybe that person is you. Maybe it's someone you've been meaning to call. Don't wait for next Thanksgiving. Don't wait for the next time the silence gets so loud it startles you. Go get your own chair, pull it up to your own table, and stay.